What's up, everybody? Today we are talking about Bordeaux and specifically the 2010 vintage. Let's do it. What's up, everybody? Today we are talking about Bordeaux and specifically the 2010 vintage, which if you are a vintage aficionado, you already know what I'm about to tell you, which is 2010 was one of the most highly praised vintages in Bordeaux's history. It came fresh off the heels of 2009, another highly praised vintage, and we saw several 100-point scores from 2010. But the one thing that critics could all agree on was that it needed a lot of time, minimum 8 to 10 years. So I wanted to check back in on them. It's 2020, see how they're doing. They've been sleeping for a decade. What's going on with three of my favorite wines, and let's see what the quality difference is. These are three wines at three different price points and from across the board in Bordeaux, so left bank and right bank. Since it's just me drinking tonight, I will be Coravinning these, so if you've never seen one, well, you're gonna see one now. Whenever I Coravin a wine, I always like to take off the top. This sort of preserves the integrity of the needle and makes sure that you don't break it, which I've definitely done a time or two. Now, in order to let these breathe a little bit, we're gonna Coravin all three at once, not one at a time, just to give them a little bit of air. All right, so the three wines we are tasting today, I will keep you waiting no longer. We have the 2010 Chateau Lascombe from Margaux. That is on the left bank of Bordeaux. That's gonna be Cabernet dominated, but there's a good bit of Merlot in there as well. In the center here, we've got the Chateau Traplan-Mondo, which is from Saint-Emilion on the right bank of Bordeaux, which is more known for Merlot and Cabernet Franc dominated blends. And then last but not least, the Chateau Pontet Canet from Poyak. That is going to be on the left bank of Bordeaux, same as the Lascombe, but this is gonna be a different appellation and Cabernet dominated. All of these wines came from Wine Access, which, as you guys probably know by now, is my favorite place to buy wine. It's really the only place I'm buying wine these days, unless I'm looking for something super, super old that I can't get anywhere. But the beauty of these wines, in particular coming from Wine Access, is that the provenance is guaranteed, meaning it likely came directly from the winery. And when you're dealing with vintage wines, especially ones like Bordeaux that are coming from across the ocean, you want to make sure that the provenance is the best it can possibly be. And the best it can possibly be for us here in the United States is, of course, direct from wineries. So all three of these coming from Wine Access, I know for certain the Ponte Canet came directly from their cellar, so it saw nowhere else in between. So these are at optimal drinking perfection, and I am excited to get into them. Let's do it. All right, Chateau Lascombe. First up to bat from the region of Margaux in Bordeaux, one of my favorite regions, often a region associated with, of course, Chateau Margaux, which is located in Margaux, but there's several other wonderful chateaus there. This is what we call a second growth. So Chateau Margaux is a first growth, and then you had several classifications numerically ordered, second, third, fourth, fifth, so on and so forth. This is a second growth. Margaux for me has always been an appellation that feels a little bit more floral. It reminds me of St. Helena and Napa Valley if we were to do a compare and contrast. There's always something a little bit soft and a little bit more feminine about that appellation that I've really, really loved, as opposed to Poyak, which can be, really intense, super gravelly soils, masculine, muscular, just really kind of a choppy wine. I've always found that Margaux, sort of on the opposite side of things, while it has that really nice intensity, has a softer side to it, and I'm definitely getting all of those wonderful florals that we love so much about this. Chateau Lascombe, not a property that has always had really wonderful history. In fact, it really went by the wayside for a long time, and it wasn't until the early 2000s when it was purchased that money was injected back into the property and really sort of rehabilitated. So in the last 2 decades, when there were really great vintages, you're seeing the optimal expression of this particular property. And what I love is that you're still able to get this amazing wine at the fraction of the price of even, the wines that we have here, which are still great deals compared to first growths in Bordeaux. So much floral, but also a lot of graphite. You're still getting all of that really nice sort of crunchy red fruit, lots of black fruit, a lot of creme de cassis, a lot of violet, and a lot of lavender. This is a huge, aromatically intense, massive bouquet on the nose wine. It's much more subdued than I would have expected on the palate than I'm getting from the nose, in a good way. I think the nose is really, really opulent and the palate is much more understated. So all of the florals that I was getting on the nose really sort of not as present on the palate, lots more of that graphite, but soft. I mean, texturally, we talked about Margaux being that really kind of plushy, soft, free-flowing, you know, hair blowing in the wind sort of appellation. I'm getting all of that plushiness, all of that softness, and the tannins have really, really mellowed. I wasn't around to taste the 2010s when they came out. I think I may have tried a few very early in my career when I was tasting on Premier when it would come to New York, but really I have no recollection of what the vintage tasted like, but my understanding, reading some of the notes on where those wines were, was, you know, tough as nails, really intense, kind of strong, needed some time. And so I don't know what this wine tasted like 10 years ago, but I will say today it is in a prime drinking window and I think going to continue to get better. I'm not sure that this wine is at its optimum though. I'm getting all of those things that we love about Bordeaux though. So if you love that sort of like barnyardy, kind of funky, you know, non-fruit, non-flower, like just sort of unquantifiable funk, there is a lot of this in this wine already, and I think it's only going to intensify with age. So I'm going to set this aside because, like I've said before, I love the core of it, but sometimes it just needs a minute to open. And also this wine hasn't been decanted. Give these a gentle decant, you know, not too much time, maybe 30 minutes, just to sort of open it up and let it sort of express itself. I think this wine really could use a bit more time in, you know, this teeny tiny little decanter that is my glass right now. So I'm going to set this one over to the side and I will move to the Chateau Pontet. Before I do that, the finish on this wine. See, this is what I mean about I don't think this wine is quite there yet. The finish on this wine wants to keep going. God, I'm still tasting it. It's amazing. That floral, all those things that I was getting on the nose, it's right on the back of my palate. And even as I'm talking and I'm breathing out, I'm still tasting it. I mean, the hallmark of a beautiful and well-made wine, great site, great terroir, great fruit, is what's happening right now in my mouth, which is that really nice, long finish. But I'm not getting that so much on the surface of the palate. So I'm curious to see if it's just a decanting thing or if it's an age thing. So we'll go back. All right, the Chateau Pontet, let's do it. Man, I didn't have a grandpa who smoked cigars and like sat in libraries with lots of leather-bound books. But if I did, I feel like this is what it would smell like. It is loaded with like really sort of not musky cologne, but like sort of a sweet men's cologne. Tons of that like great leather that we love so much from Bordeaux. A little bit of like pipe tobacco, cigar box, you know, all of those like annoying things that some say, but like if you put the image in your head right now. If you were to walk into a room, into a library, grandpa was sitting there, he got a smoking jacket on or a cardigan, he's smoking a pipe, he's got lots of leather around him, his chair's leather, everything's leather, like some deer head on the wall, and envision that and envision what that would smell like, and that's what's in this glass. So when we say things like tobacco leaf and you know, pipe tobacco, cigar box, things like that, I mean, those are very, very real things that you get in these glasses. And what's so interesting is that they're not things that happen right out the gate. And I find it fascinating that critics are able to sort of extrapolate out, right? So these things weren't there when this wine came out. It wasn't quite as aromatic as it is now. It was, you know, probably lots of big, bright red fruit. But now this wine is really starting to give way to all of those other things. And I think, you know, this is a wine that's in such a gorgeous, gorgeous drinking spot. A little bit more on the tart side. And I have to say, though it is saying 16% alcohol, you wouldn't know it. That's big. but not in a mouth coating way and not in a way that's overwhelming. You know, I love Bordeaux because one, it's Bordeaux and the wines just have such a great sense of place. But there is always sort of this savory quality to these wines. There's always sort of, you know, as big as they are, there's a sense of restraint. It's almost like, you know, they properly salted their food and they've got enough acid. And even though it's a big muscular steak, you want to keep going back for more. This wine just keeps going and going and going. I will say it is big and it is intense, and it's juicy and it's lush and savory at the same time, but it does not have the finish that this Lascombe has. And for a wine that is $100 more, I actually would have expected it to have a slightly longer finish. So a gorgeous wine for sure, a wine that again, I'm going to revisit these one last time. We'll do a little compare contrast, but I would be curious to see where this wine goes. Maybe it might get more aromatic. Maybe this is a wine that needs a few more years to get that sort of length on it. But I do find it very interesting. It's a beautiful wine though, for sure. I think it could be slightly shut down at the moment. It's not giving me everything that I want out of it. It's sort of just stopping. And I think that's a result of it just needing more time. But again, we'll go back and we'll revisit. Let's go to the Ponte Canet. So I mentioned that I was in Bordeaux in 2015. I did not visit Lascombe. I did visit Chateau Pontet Canet and I had dinner there. But I also went to Ponte Canet, and some of my fondest memories from that trip are at Ponte Canet. And I think for anyone who visits this property or has visited this property, you kind of know why. You pull up and it's like a Swiss village. It's kind of, you know, you go to all of these fancy chateaux, and we certainly went to the big ones. We went to the First Gross and, you know, the one that looks like Taj Mahal and the one that's, you know, just sweeping and beautiful. And they all are, but there's something about Ponte Canet that's a little bit more understated. This is not a first growth. This is not a second growth. This is actually a fifth growth. So even though it is a fifth growth, it is a wine that is highly recognized for being top of its class for a number of different reasons. What I said about, you know, really remembering this visit, well, it's not just how it looks, it's how they are treating the grapes and treating the wines. It's quite different than most of the other chateaus in Bordeaux, though I think you're starting to see a few other places follow suit. And so what I mean is they are farming biodynamically and still have horses going through the vines. I mean, it's wild to see, but literal, you know, sort of Clydesdale looking horses that are plowing everything. You walk into the winery and it's, you know, tons of amphora, so, you know, these big concrete eggs, you know, rows and rows and rows of them, gravity flow systems. I mean, definitely pushing into the realm of biodynamic farming and making sure to utilize what they can from the actual vineyard. Things that look really old school but are actually not really the norm in Bordeaux. It is still family owned and operated, so Alfred Testarone is the patriarch. He also owns a property in Napa called Pimray. It's a newer project, but not a new vineyard. It used to be Robin Williams Vineyard. The Ponte Canet had an incredible review from Robert Parker. I mean, you can Google it and read it. I mean, it was just the most glowing review one could ever hope for in a wine. But this was also a wine that scored incredibly high across the board, not just by Robert Parker. This was a wine that really a lot of critics saw as the wine of the vintage in Bordeaux. So interesting that, you know, sort of not an inexpensive wine, definitely the most expensive wine of this lineup at about $350. But when you compare it to First Growths that scored just as high, and you compare that to the reviews that they got versus Ponte Canet, well, you're looking at, you know, Chateau Latour, which got 100 points, and that's going to be $1,000 versus $350. So still very much a deal and a collector's item, I think, for a lot of people who know about Ponte Canet and love Ponte Canet. And certainly, you know, among the industry folk, this is a beloved wine by all of us in Bordeaux. So let's taste. Ooh, just pencil shavings and graphite, like, to the nines. Gorgeous, super, super masculine nose. Really intense, dark, brooding, red, black, purple fruit. Oof, and a nice hefty dose of black licorice, that nice little anisette Fernet Branca. This is like dark, intense, very serious natured. I need this to be decanted. I think this is a wine that needs to sit for a solid 30 to 45 minutes to be opened up. You can feel it, like, you know, as I'm giving this air and swirling, you can feel it wanting to give me more and more and more and more. I think this wine for sure needs a strong decant. Similar to the Chateau Pontet, I think we had been optimistic with 10 years being the marker for where this wine is ready to drink, and it's certainly softened up texturally. It's round, it's softer, but it is still tight and gripping. And I think it still needs a little bit more time to sort of flesh out, and so we can see some of those gorgeous layers underneath. I think this is a wine that needs probably another 5 or 10 years before we're just gonna start uncovering. You know, 5 would be the minimum before this wine, I think, you know, is really gonna start to give us what we want out of it. Again, we'll go back to it and see what it's doing in just a few minutes, and I'm gonna revisit that last comb right now. Woo! This is still the most aromatic. This is the last comb. It has that sort of, you know, we call it reduction, which is sort of that matchsticky, sort of sour smell to it in a good way though. You know, where the fruit just, you know, feels like it's sort of been under something for a bit. I love it though. I think it's so interesting. And for me, right now, this is the wine that I would, at this point, this is the wine that I would be drinking personally. This is the wine that I know that I'm gonna go back to. It's not as big as the other ones. It's definitely more live, but the finish and the florals, I think that's what gets me every time. And this does, you know, it's interesting, Robert Parker has called Spotswood the Chateau Margaux of California, of Napa Valley, and I think there's a lot of similarities with this wine. Margaux and St. Helena have always sort of had this sort of symbiotic relationship to me, and I think this wine is very, very Spotswood-esque. I'm really, really impressed with this. I mean, I think, you know, when you compare this to the rest of these wines, it really, really shines and stands on its own, which I'm thrilled about, because I was a little bit worried that this would sort of get lost in the shuffle. Let's see how that Chateau Pontet is doing, huh? All that sweetness and ripeness is coming out now. I think this is a wine that has changed quite a bit. What I'm loving about all of these wines is that, you know, though these two are not totally giving me what I want on the palate as far as flavor goes, because I know there's so many more layers to go, so much more to uncover. Texturally, these wines are where we want them to be, so that edge has sort of fallen off, and I think that's a sign that we're moving in the right direction. It's also, I mean, there's still big, massive, and textured wines, which tells me that this is not a wine that's going to fall off the edge. They still have a lot in the center, they still have a lot to give, and I think, you know, we're 10 years into these wines. These are not going anywhere. Yeah, again, I think, I just don't think we're there yet. You know, I kind of hoped that 2010, you know, here we are in 2020, that we, you know, these wines would have arrived, but I also think it speaks to the vintage. I think it speaks to the wonderful nature of this vintage, and that these are so age worthy, and these are wines that just are not ready to give it everything it has quite yet. My sort of last thoughts, last drops for these wines. Well, Last Comb is ready to go. To me, this is a wine that is incredibly drinkable and delicious right now, and a wine that I think, you know, will have a very long life. I do not think will have the life that the Chateau Pontet or the Ponte Canet will have. These two wines are still, to me, you know, very tightly knit, need a little bit more time. Delicious if you were to just buy them and drink them. If you're holding on to your 2010s and you still have a few, check in on it, pull a cork, see how it's doing for yourself. I think you'll find that they're really enjoyable. They're just not at optimal place yet. They're just not giving you everything that you could possibly get from it. And to me, that's the point of spending money on these wines. You want every last ounce of what this wine is capable of, and we're just not quite there yet. So I think I will revisit these, you know, hopefully if YouTube's around and I'm still around in 5 years, I hope to revisit these again. Maybe we'll even do like a little vertical of Ponte Canet, although I did do that earlier this year, and you know, I do remember the 2000s being, you know, really, really intense and muscular. But anyway, I think that I will definitely save these two for a little while longer and continue to enjoy the Lescombe for now. So I will see you all next time. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you want me to do next. Bye.